They say I was mad, that I had imagined everything. The dynasty, the book, Wild, all of it. But I remember. It began after the fall, or perhaps just before. Either way, when I returned from the asylum, the world had changed. Or I had. It was hard to say. It had been just 2 years since I'd fallen from my horse in Central Park. A strange and violent accident. The blow to my head had confined me to an asylum for nearly a year. But I recovered. More fully, I would argue, than anyone else ever has. I was not broken. I had seen something. I had begun to understand. It was before the fall, weeks, maybe more, that I first read The King in Yellow. Not the censored excerpts, but the full, unexpurgated play, an antique volume slipped into the wrong stack at a private library uptown, or perhaps placed there for me. They say it drives men mad, but that is only half the truth. It opens your eyes first, and then, yes, it shows you things you might wish you could forget. I remember the moment I first saw the yellow sign. Not in the book, no, it came later, in waking life. On a wall that shouldn't have existed, in a dream that bled into morning. When I awoke, it was there, on the back of my hand. A mark, or perhaps a scar. It burned itself into me. I had begun to see connections, threads that others dismissed as delusion, but I knew better. The play had shown me the true structure of things, not metaphor, not hallucination, something unveiled. I needed someone who could help me make sense of it, or at least someone who wouldn't call for doctors. I remembered his name from a footnote in the back pages of a private edition, one of the few remaining fragments that hadn't been censored. It mentioned a man in New York who dealt in secrets, reputations, and hidden histories. That name stayed with me, Mr. Wilde, and so I sought him out. It was in a dark, crooked building on the west side of Washington Square that I found him. His apartment lay at the top of a stairwell that seemed never to end, more like a chimney than a hall, and it groaned with every footfall. The door bore no number, only a faint outline where a plate might once have been. The first time I knocked, I heard nothing, but as I turned to leave, the door opened on its own. Not fully, just a crack. Enough to see a glint of pale light on wire. Wilde's voice came from the gloom. "Come in and shut the door, quickly." Inside, the air was stale and electric. The apartment was chaos. Walls lined with shelves of clippings, yellowed scraps, string maps pinned like spider webs across the ceiling. Typewritten pages lay in heaps, covering the floor like dry leaves. In one corner, a half-collapsed cot. In another, a cage with a deformed cat glaring through the bars. Mr. Wilde sat hunched near the window, scribbling something onto a ledger. He didn't rise. "Sit," he said, "but not there. That chair is reserved. I did not ask for whom." He called himself a repairer of reputations, and for a price he could fix nearly anything. Ruined careers, lost inheritances, inconvenient enemies. But there was more to him than blackmail, much more. He spoke of the hidden order, the coming restoration of the imperial dynasty, of my role in it. He showed me papers, names, seals, letters signed in blood and wax. I understood only fragments, but I felt their truth. And as he spoke, the yellow sign pulsed faintly on the back of my hand, though I dared not look. He paused often, sometimes to cough, sometimes to listen to the walls. His ears were always alert, twitching at creaks, distant footfalls, or the stir of wind through the window pane. "They watch me," he said once, without explanation. "But they don't know I watch back." Wilde claimed to be compiling a directory of those loyal to the true line, men and women of influence, all waiting for the signal. He hinted that I had been chosen, or that I had chosen myself by reading the book and surviving it. It was never entirely clear. At one point, he leaned close and said, "You understand, don't you, why they tried to put you away? It wasn't the fall. They feared what you'd seen. You weren't mad. You were awake." The room seemed to darken as he spoke, the strings on the ceiling vibrating with some unseen tension. It felt less like conversation and more like initiation. Before I left, he pressed a folded document into my palm. "Study this," he said. "Memorize the seals. Burn it after." I still haven't burned it. I kept the paper hidden beneath the floorboards of my room. At night, I would read it by candlelight, tracing the symbols until they etched themselves behind my eyelids. Each name Wilde had listed, senators, bankers, military men, now appeared differently when I saw them in the news. Their statements, their votes, their movements. They weren't random. They were signaling, coordinating. I began to keep a journal of my own. Names I overheard, patterns I detected in architecture, in print, in the tone of a stranger's cough. Everything was connected. Everything was preparing. And Wilde, he was no mere lunatic in a cluttered room. He was a minister, a herald. The repairs he made were not to reputations, but to reality itself. I visited him often. The route became automatic, like pilgrimage, and each time, the sign itched a little more under my skin. It was after one of those visits that Wilde first mentioned Louis Castaigne, my cousin. A slight tightening of his mouth was the only sign he disliked saying the name. "He is not one of us," Wilde said. "He has refused the sign. He is aligned with the old order." That surprised me. Louis had always been pleasant, conventional, a man of gentle ambition and reasonable prospects. He worked in the library and was due to marry Constance Hawberk. Her father, Mr. Hawberk, restored antique armor in a little shop not far from the library. An odd, quiet man with spectacles and stained gloves, always polishing relics of forgotten wars. But Wilde insisted Louis was an obstacle. "He watches you," Wilde said, "not out of love, out of fear." At first I thought little of it, but over the following days I began to notice things. The hesitation in Louis's voice, the quiet when I entered the room, the way his eyes lingered on the back of my hand. Constance, too, seemed changed. She no longer laughed so freely. When I mentioned her future with Louis, she would grow quiet, as if remembering a conversation she wasn't meant to repeat. I wrote it all down, all of it. The fragments were assembling themselves into something larger. The dynasty could not rise without correction. The shift was subtle at first, a suggestion, a look, a phrase Wilde let linger longer than necessary. But something had changed. The air around him grew heavier, charged with a pressure I could not name. The apartment felt thinner, as if the walls were losing their grip on geometry. Time slowed in that place, or quickened. I would leave unsure how long I'd stayed. I could feel it every time I left, like something followed me, just out of view. The preparation was no longer metaphor. The curtain was thinning. The time for action was nearing. It was Wilde who gave me the sword. It came wrapped in oilcloth, hidden beneath a stack of falsified birth records and forged letters of succession. It wasn't ceremonial, not entirely. The blade had weight, balance. It could wound. Or more. He said nothing as he handed it to me, just watched. At home, I hung it behind the curtain in my room where the light wouldn't touch it. But I could feel it there, humming faintly, like it remembered a different century. I would practice at night when no one could hear. Wilde began speaking of a date, an hour in fact, a moment when the veil would lift, when the dynasty would reclaim its throne. That same paper, the one Wilde had pressed into my palm that first night, listed names marked for elevation and names marked for removal. I read them aloud in whispers at night, one by one. The ink shimmered when I stared too long. Some names I recognized, senators, publishers, priests, and then Louis. Seeing his name among them stopped me. I read it again, unsure whether it had always been there or it simply emerged as I became ready to see it. Others felt older than names, older than language. I could not say how many pages there were. Every time I reached what I thought was the end, the paper curled back and revealed another fold. I heard them in my sleep, in my breath, in the low whine of wind through the alley behind Wilde's apartment. The names repeated, changed, multiplied, until I could no longer tell if I was reading them or if they were reading me. The list never ended, nor should it. They were all so blind, Louis, Constance, and her father, Mr. Hawberk, smiling as though they lived in a sane world, as though truth didn't burn beneath their feet. But I knew what was coming. The city began to shimmer, not visibly, not at first, but I could sense it. The rhythm of the streets growing uneven, the buildings leaning ever so slightly toward me, as though listening. Reflections in puddles lingered a second too long. Shadows stretched themselves across corners where no light fell. The birds were the first to speak, not in words, but in patterns, circling above the library, always counterclockwise. Then the bells began to toll out of sync. Each chime a kind of code I was meant to decipher. I could feel the answers building behind my teeth. Sleep became an uncertain threshold, not because of fear, but because the dreams were too vivid. Yellow landscapes of twisted towers, impossibly steep and pulsing with internal light, and twin suns that hung above like burning coins hammered into the sky. The air in those dreams was thick with meaning. The buildings leaned inward as I passed, whispering in a tongue that stirred my blood. I walked streets I had never seen but instinctively knew, and the strangers I met bowed, not out of politeness, but recognition. I was expected. I awoke once with a name on my lips, not Lewis, not Wilde, something older. The sign pulsed beneath my skin now, not just on my hand, but deeper in the bone. When I looked in the mirror, the reflection would sometimes smile a moment too late. It wasn't madness, it was arrival. The signs had ripened, the shadows had drawn close. Soon, Wilde said, the seals would break and the city would fold open like a flower in black sunlight. I kept my coat by the door and the sword polished. I began speaking less in the daylight hours, hoarding breath for the moment I would be called. When that hour came, I would not hesitate. They thought they had buried the truth beneath books and iron gates, but Carcosa cannot be buried, and he who wears the pallid mask does not sleep. He stands at the edge of dreams, where the towers of Carcosa rise from blackened seas, His shadow touches every page of the book, every name wild whispered, every seal burned into the paper I keep beneath the floorboards. He watches the veils thin, the false world tremble. The bells are tolling for him, off-key, backwards. Beautiful. I hear them at night, and I know I am not alone in hearing. He does not blink, he does not breathe, he waits. And now, so do I. The day came veiled in golden haze, the kind of light that makes all things appear older, more distant, like memory. I walked with purpose, though the city bent around me, subtly shifting its streets to usher me forward. Lewis stood in the courtyard behind Hawberk's shop, speaking with Constance. Their voices fell to whispers when I approached. I could see the worry in her eyes, the quiet tension in his stance. I greeted them both. They did not return it. I asked to speak with Lewis alone. He agreed. We stepped inside. The air smelled of rust and dust and oil. Bits of chainmail and cuirasses gleamed faintly in the gloom. I placed the sword gently on a workbench. "You've changed," Lewis said. I nodded. "I've become what I was meant to be." His expression flickered. Pity, then fear. "There's no dynasty, Hildred. You were sick. We tried to help you." I stepped forward. "You would have left me in that place forever." He opened his mouth to protest, but the sword was already in my hand. I didn't strike. I only showed it to him. Slowly, deliberately. The blade caught the light in a way that seemed wrong, as if it bent the air around it. "Wilde drew a line through your name," I said. Lewis turned, calling for Hawberk. I don't remember what happened next, not cleanly. There was shouting, a flash of movement. My hand stung and the sword clattered to the floor. Constance screamed. I still hear it sometimes, clear as a bell that never stopped ringing. And just like that, the veil fell again. They claimed I attacked him, that I was mad. But I know what I saw in his eyes, just before the others pulled me away. He had seen it too. The sign. It was there, just for a moment, undimmed, undeniable, watching. They said I lunged, that I shouted incoherently and tried to harm him. Perhaps I did. But in that moment, time had folded, just as Wilde said it would. The walls rippled. Their words moved too slowly. The shop dissolved into light. When I awoke, I was back in the asylum. But not the one from before. This one was colder, quieter. I had no visitors. No one spoke to me of Wilde. I asked, once. The nurse only frowned and said, "There's no one by that name on record." No one mentioned the sword. The scar on my hand never faded. But some nights, when the wind rattles the window panes and the moon casts long yellow light across the floor, I feel it there again. The sign. Waiting.
You've reached the end of the signal. If the story held you, stay with us. Like and subscribe, it really does help. There are more corridors ahead, more transmissions waiting to be heard. Thank you for listening.